Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for today, June 11th, 2021. Well, the first of the three summits is getting underway now. This is the G7 summit that's taking place in the United Kingdom. And it's taking place in a backdrop of a language of war. This is coming out of Washington, coming out of London, coming out of some of the other capitals of Europe. But allegedly, the idea is to establish the principle of an alliance of democratic states to stand up against the bullying, the threats, the malign intentions of Russia and China. Now, this is occurring as the United States, under Biden, is continuing with Pompeo's policy of issuing sanction after sanction against Russia, against China, continuing the Caesar sanctions against Syria, and then talking about Western values, that these sanctions, which are threatening the lives of millions of children and innocent civilians, are supposedly humanitarian sanctions to protect our Western values. And as I've been asking, what Western value is it that you starve children, that you deny medicine to people who are sick and disabled? Those are Western values? Because if so, we're going to see the world turning away from the so-called values of the democratic states. And at the same time, they're ascribing to Russia and China this idea of malign intent. That is, they're not abiding by the rules-based order. But where do the rules come from? Are these from God? Are these from natural law? Or are these from the bankers of London and Wall Street, who are insisting that they get their first pound of flesh before anything else is left over for the rest of the world to consume? This is what the Great Reset is all about, the Green New Deal, the shutting down of industry, of agriculture, the attack on the idea of national sovereignty. Because what does national sovereignty mean? It means that the function of a government is to take care of the needs of the people of that nation. Now, that doesn't mean you exclude the needs of any other nation from your calculations. It means that while you put those needs as your priority, that is government of, by, and for the people, the best way to realize that is through harmonious cooperative relationships with your neighbors and other nations. But that's what's under attack. The attempt of the British adoption of geopolitics at the end of the 19th century was to split nations apart, to divide people within nations based on ethnicity, religion, tribal loyalties, race, so that you always have a point of intervention from the outside. So with President Biden going in locked and loaded for a confrontation with Putin on the 16th, he's going to the G7 meeting and then the NATO summit to get a consensus to support these so-called democratic values. Now, there's some opposition to this. I mean, Merkel made it clear that she was not going to allow the United States to dictate to Germany and Russia whether or not they could trade energy. You know, think of this, the idea of sanctions against the Nord Stream 2. What does that mean? That means that the United States is telling other countries they cannot get energy from Russia. What gives the United States the right to do that? Suppose Russia had declared sanctions against the United States for using the Keystone pipeline. Oh, I forgot, Biden just shut that down. So you don't need external enemies to shut down energy production in the United States when you have a green government acting on behalf of green financial interests such as BlackRock, should be named GreenRock, really. Mark Carney of the Bank of England, the United Nations, the Paris Climate Conference, COP26, all of them are dictating policies to the rest of the world. No development, no coal, no nuclear, no fossil fuel, based on fake science. So is this going to hold up? Can Biden actually go there and convince the other Western countries to go along with this? Well, this was the first question I got, and I got it from 3 or 4 different people. What do I expect from the summit? And as Jen Psaki said, we don't expect too much from it. Hopefully there'll be a dialogue. Hopefully there'll be some honest discussion. Biden boasted that he's going to go and tell Putin what he wants. Well, Putin may say to Biden, we don't agree on what you are demanding. And we'll see what happens. But I think at this point, the best that could come out of this would be a decision to keep talking, but a realization from the G7 to the NATO summit to the Putin-Biden summit, a realization that the so-called rules-based order is a fantasy in the minds of people such as Pompeo and Blinken, maybe in Biden's mind also, although I don't really want to go there. But what would that mean? That means essentially that they believe that the U.S. and its alliance is economically powerful enough and military powerful enough to impose its will on any other nation, to overcome them and force them to give up their sovereignty. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the best thing people in the United States can hope for is resistance from Russia and China to this rules-based order. And hopefully that stand against this arbitrary assertion of imperial power will inspire some courage in other leaders in the West and Japan and Australia and elsewhere, who will then stand up and say, no, we're not going along with this Great Reset or this Green New Deal either. That's the best that could come out of it. The worst would be weak-kneed, wimpy submission by our so-called allies to the bullying of the United States and the United Kingdom around a British imperial agenda of a Great Reset and a Green New Deal. So there is some hope. I think the Russians have been clear. Lavrov, in his comments, the Russian foreign minister, said these alleged threats from Russia don't exist. And if necessary, if you're going to lock us out of SWIFT, if you're going to put sanctions on our financial sector, then Russia and other nations will have to begin a new monetary system. But we don't want to do it, he said. So that's what I think would be the best to come out of this summit. Most important is your role in shaping the expectations of your friends and neighbors and coworkers to understand that we need to move toward LaRouche's four laws and the four-power agreement for a new Bretton Woods system, as opposed to a top-down unilateral rules-based order enforced by U.S. nuclear missiles. Now, the other question I got from many people, and by the way, let me tell you, I did receive some questions about what can be done to move the young population, to give them a sense of a mission, a sense of their own destiny. And I'm not going to address that today because Helga Zepp-LaRouche will be talking to young people tomorrow. And if you're a young person, and by that I mean under 40, maybe under 50, who knows, maybe under 70, but someone who considers themselves to be a youth, check with the Schiller Institute to find out when Helga Zepp-LaRouche will be doing her seminar tomorrow with young people, because we are building a new youth movement. So I'll leave that up to Helga. Let me take the other question that came from a number of people. What's happening in the Middle East? What's the prospect for peace? Will the ceasefire hold? Will Netanyahu find a way to get back in? Look, the region is in tremendous flux because it's not just Israel and Palestine. When you look at this, you have to look at what Lyndon LaRouche did in his series of strategic articles, all of which were under the general rubric of global confrontation, global strategy. He wrote numerous articles, and what he kept pointing to is that you can't look at these as isolated events, because when you're dealing with the Middle East, what are you dealing with, or Southwest Asia? You're dealing with a playground of British operations going back to the end of the 19th century, even earlier. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, this was a region that represented a potential historically as a link between West and East, North and South. The potential for corridors of development, not just to move goods, but to actually transform nature in that area has always existed and to some extent had been realized, not in the modern period. Because in the modern period, it was turned into a zone of confrontation between the British Empire and previously other competing empires such as the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Prussian Empire. But now it's not so much empires as it is the British imperial system trying to keep the region in permanent war, permanent flux, no development, a place where very wealthy people make money that they can use to fund British operations. Now, within that, you have the Israel-Palestine question, you have the Iraq War, you have the elections coming up in Iran, you have the sanctions that are destroying and killing people in Syria as well as in Yemen. You have the potential for wars going on in North Africa. The whole situation is unstable all the way across Africa because of the same kinds of problems. What's needed is an intervention of economic development. And that's why Mrs. LaRouche and Hussein Askari have been emphasizing the importance of a Chinese intervention through the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative through the Middle East, through Southwest Asia into Africa. That if this were done, you could then demonstrate that the mutual interest of parties which otherwise are being manipulated to go to war is for peaceful economic development, including the Palestinians, including the Israelis, including the Iranians, including everyone in the region. that kind of peaceful economic development addresses the most important needs of everyone living in that part of the world. Now, will that happen? You have a couple of things to consider. First of all, the British intend that it does not happen. They're moving everything they can to continue with the Bernard Lewis plan of balkanizing the region, breaking it apart according to ethnicity, according to tribes, according to religion, to maintain an instability which always requires an imperial hand to straighten things out. As long as that continues, as long as the U.S. grants that opportunity to the British Empire, and by British Empire I'm including the military-industrial complex, the financial institutions of the United States, as well as those of Britain and the European Union. But as long as they have a free hand, there's not going to be peace in the region. So what's needed is to address the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is not Arab-Israeli hatred, Jews against Muslim. It's that you have forces outside the region engaging in manipulation to pit those forces against each other as a basis of sustaining their power and their control, whether it's over oil, flows of money, or just creating bottlenecks in a trade system so that there's no mutual cooperation that can emerge. Now, on the specifics, Netanyahu has made it clear that he is going to be the fascist who he is. He prepared to send thugs from his extremist settlers movement to demonstrate outside the homes of his former colleagues who have now decided to form a coalition government to break Netanyahu's stranglehold on power. His reaction was he was not going to let it happen. He's claiming there was election fraud. He's claiming there was fraud in the coalition vote. And he's essentially saying, look, I am the king, King Bibi. It's my predestination to rule this land from the Nile to the Tigris and Euphrates, and I'm going to make sure that happens. Now, in the meantime, he's in violation of international law, as his recent attacks on Gaza show. He's in violation of Israeli law. He's facing 3 major corruption charges, and probably there are more to come. And his policy of preventing a Palestinian state not only threatens the lives of the Palestinian people, but also the Israelis. Because as long as you have a policy of an iron wall against a population that lives in the same land with you, that is an apartheid policy, you create the unrest that makes it safe for everyone who lives there. It would be nice if Bibi would just say, all right, so long, see you now, I see you've rejected me. That's not his predilection. And unfortunately, he has a lot of support from so-called Christian fundamentalists in the United States, people like Mike Pompeo, who supported Israel's annexation of land, the expansion of the settlements, and so on. And it appears as though the Biden administration, at least up until now, is going to continue that. So as long as you, again, have these larger forces shaping the politics, the people who suffer will be the people who live in the region. And whether one is strong enough to impose its will over the other today doesn't mean there'll be a guarantee of peace, doesn't mean there's security for the future. It means, in fact, you're planting the seeds of the next war. So, again, we come up with the same solution. The power has to be removed from the hands of the oligarchy. To do that, we need an alliance of sovereign nations, which can begin with Russia and China, India, maybe Japan, maybe Germany, hopefully the United States. LaRouche's four-power agreement is the US, India, China, and Russia, reaching a mutually cooperative agreement on establishing a new just financial system, taking the power away from the central banks who require the world to be at war to sustain their power. Now, the other aspect of this is in the United States, we have to give up our illusions that somehow Trump is coming back and that he has all the solutions. There were a number of things that he said and tried to do that were good, but he didn't do it. Now, maybe if he has a second chance, he'll have learned something. But that second chance isn't going to come, and there won't be a second chance for the United States unless the American people learn the lesson of who's deployed to destroy the United States, what their goals are, and what their weaknesses are. And this is something you can learn from the LaRouche movement. We must restore the principles of the American system of physical economy, which means the common good of all takes precedence over the private wealth acquisition of the few. That is, we need no rules-based order that defends the interests of the wealthy. We need the common interests of mankind to be protected by sovereign governments in alliance with other sovereign governments. That's going to be the major theme of our June 26th and June 27th conference of the Schiller Institute. So go to theschillerinstitute.com, sign up for that, and go to our websites and look for all the material that documents what I've been talking about and gives you ideas about what Lyndon LaRouche's unique solutions are and how we can get them. Thanks for joining me. Have a good weekend. I'll see you again on Monday.